So now that we've discussed the cabinet box and the face frame components, we're going to switch gears and discuss very briefly some doors. And we'll get into the door construction method and we'll demonstrate all that in a variety of ways further on in the course. But for now, let's just understand the basics of what the cabinet door looks like. So the door is going to be very similar to the face frame in that it's going to have two styles, one on the left, one on the right. Again, they run from the top to the bottom, and then the rails run between them. There's also a center panel. They tend to all be the same species. So when we're talking face frames or doors, if you're going to do a stained oak, for instance, then your face frame and your door rails and stiles will all be hardwood, oak, and your center panel then will have to be a piece of oak, plywood, or a glued together multiple boards, also of oak. Always want to do the same species. When we talk about painting cabinets, that can be a little different. You can have poplar and maybe birch for your center panel because they're all going to be painted, they're all going to look the same anyway. But especially if you get into the stained versus the paint, the stained doors, cabinets all need to be the same species. So if this were a maple door with a maple, it would need a maple insert, and the face frame would need to be maple. The inside of the cabinet can really be anything you want, but that's the trend that most people build to. So to join all these pieces, you could use pocket screws, but I wouldn't. The reason being, if we were to flip the cabinet back here, you'd see pocket screw joints on the back of your door. Now, the pocket screw joints are fine for your face frame because you never see the back of the face frame unless you're to stick a mirror or climb into your cabinet. But your doors are always going to be open, and we want the back and the front to both be clean and use a different type of joint. So this is really like a tongue and groove or a mortise and tenon joint, and we'll show a close-up of this, but your rails will actually have a tongue, and your your stiles will have a groove that tongue sits in, and then the center panel will also sit in that groove. And what that does is it provides multiple places where this cabinet actually, these components join together and gives you a nice strong piece here. This particular door, after it received its joints, then they had some after routing and it took off the edge here with a little chamfer and a back cut over here. This particular door was built using like a cope and stick type router bit system. We can show you what that looks like, but what it does is actually puts a profile on the one side of the stile and cuts a matching reverse piece on the ends of these rails, so the rail just kind of lines up with that style. And that's all just done with two different router bits. If we were going to do a shaker door, which we'll probably do in this course, these would just be straight up and down, these straight square boards, and it would just be the plain tongue and groove or the mortise and tenon type joint. But again, you can get different looks depending on what different router bits you use. But for the most part, that's just how this works. A couple other things to note. This particular door has a very thin 1/4 inch panel. All our hardwood is going to be 3/4 inch thick. For our face frame and for our doors, rails, and stiles, it's always going to be 3/4 inch thick. Our center panels will vary. This particular manufacturer used a 1/4 inch, and you can hear it. It's got a little bit of a drum beat to it there. It's kind of thin. It's not that heavy. Sometimes it can be 1/4 inch is nice to work because you just put a groove in there and that 1/4 inch panel slides in. The challenge though is sometimes you get some warping in it, and then it's not quite as heavy duty. So sometimes what we'll do is we'll use a 1/2 inch thick piece of plywood, and it'll look the same from the front, but in the back it'll be all flush back here, and it'll just give you a heavier, stronger door. So the other thing you can obviously do is do glass inserts, and the glass doesn't get inserted into the door until the very end. You build the door and you stain it, and you can fit the glass up, but really the glass goes in at the very end. And we're going to get into the hardware later, in terms of hidden hinges and all that sort of thing, but the basic things you need to know are that there's rails and stiles and a center panel. Also, doors come can mount onto the cabinet either in a full overlay or an inset configuration. So full overlay will be when the door completely hides the opening and it overlays the opening. The door is actually larger than the door opening itself, usually by about 3/4, half an inch in all the way around it. All right, so that would be referred to as a full overlay door. Okay, doors where the door actually sits inside and is recessed and is slightly smaller than the opening is referred to as an inset door, and we've done a lot of those on our site. And the inset doors, they're built the same way. They're just sized and trimmed just to fit, just so there's an even, consistent gap all the way around. That's kind of the tricky part of building those, is getting that gap set right. But they tend to look a little more of a higher end look compared to the full overlay doors. But full overlay doors like this one are definitely the most common. And the same thing goes for the drawer fronts. You either have a full overlay drawer front or you have a drawer front that's inset. There is also a third type of door and drawer front style, which I believe is 3/4 overlay, and it's where it's half in and half out of the door. There's a very less common. You tend to see them in more 50s and 60s style kitchens, and we can show you what a picture of that looks like. But that's where the door actually just is partially in and partially out. It's neither full overlay or inset. So those are the basics of the doors. You just kind of want to be aware of how they're made, what the parts are, how they relate to the face frame, whether they're going to be in there, inset, full overlay. Again, keeping an eye on the species. So if you want to do painted or you want to do something stained. So we'll take a minute now and we'll talk about some basics of drawer boxes.